Good evening, everybody. Today's program is being recorded. Any views expressed in this webinar are for general educational purposes only and do not represent any official views or positions of the sponsoring or presenters organizations. We are looking forward to your questions at the end of the program. Please submit them anytime using the Q&A section of the WebEx. Greetings and welcome to today's educational program, Employing the Kano Model to Understand the Voice of Customer by Dr. Beth Cudney. This is your moderator, Shobha Medal, with ASQ Quality Management Division. Today we have the distinct pleasure of hearing from Dr. Beth Cudney. Please join me in welcoming her. Dr. Beth Cudney is the president of Cudney Consulting Group LLC and a professor of data analytics at Maryville University. She received her BS in Industrial Engineering from North Carolina State University, Masters of Engineering in Mechanical Engineering and MBA from the University of Hartford, and a doctorate in Engineering Management from the University of Missouri-Rolla. She is a recipient of the ASQ Crosby Medal, IAQ Amazing Book Prize, IAQ Yoshio Kondo Academic Research Prize, and ASQ AV Feigenbaum Medal. She is an ASQ Fellow, IISE Fellow, ASEM Fellow, and academician in the International Academy of Quality. And so, without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. Beth Cudney. Beth, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited about talking about the Kano model. This is something that I've been very interested in for over 20 years. And anytime you're working in quality, really, it's always about understanding your customers' expectations, and not even so much their expectations sometimes as their perceptions. And so that's something you'll hear me talk a lot about in this webinar, is that when we talk about the Kano model, we're really talking about our customers' perceptions of quality and what they want. So it's a very unique and interesting tool in terms of really understanding customers' expectations. And that allows us then, as a provider of services or products, to make sure that we're meeting or hopefully even exceeding our customers' expectations, and we're spending our time where it really matters. So I want to talk about a few things that I'm hoping that you can walk away with from this webinar. So the first thing is really using the Kano model as a way to understand and identify the customer's needs based on the Kano model. We'll talk about how to develop a Kano questionnaire. It's very different than probably any survey that you've ever conducted. So we'll go through and talk about how to develop the Kano questionnaire. And then using the Kano questionnaire results from your customers, how we can really perform the voice of the customer analysis and interpret those results so that we can improve those products and services. So most of you have probably heard of the Kano model. Most of you have probably seen the Kano model. And so I'll start with kind of a brief overview of what the Kano model is. So Dr. Kano introduced the Kano model in 1984. It really looked at expectations from the customer's perspective, and he built his theory off of Hertzberg's model, which was more of a linear model in terms of the more we provide, the happier the customers are going to be. And that's not really always the case. There's not a linear relationship between what we provide our customers in terms of products and services and how happy they are. So Dr. Kano and his team really looked at how do we take this into a model and understand what those expectations are. So we broke it down into 5 categories, and there's really 3 main ones. Those are must-be attributes, attractive attributes, and one-dimensional attributes. And then the secondary ones are more reverse or indifferent. And so when we talk about these, I want to kind of, again, start from a high level, is we're trying to understand what the customer's level of satisfaction is. And if we look at the model from a satisfaction perspective, that's on our y-axis. Our customer can be either very dissatisfied or very satisfied, and in the middle, they're kind of neutral. As a supplier to our customers, the way we can achieve their expectations is more of the x-axis. We've got our degree of achievement. So our customers said they wanted something. We either didn't provide it at all, we kind of provided it, or we fully provided what their expectations are. So we'll keep coming back to these axes to understand what this means in terms of each of these different attributes. So let's take a closer look at what these attributes really mean. And I want to highlight real quick before I switch over a reference. So one of the ASQ journals, the Journal for Quality and Participation, has an excellent article, that was written by Christine Robinson back in 2009. And it provides an excellent overview of really what the different Kano model levels are and what they mean. So let's start with the must-be attributes. These are things that must be there, hence the name, right? These are basic requirements of the product or service that your customer is expecting. If they're there, they're not overly excited, but if they're not there, they're going to be unhappy. So my typical example for this is clean silverware. When I go into a restaurant and I order my meal, but I don't say, oh, and by the way, I want clean silverware. I just expect it to be there, right? So this is why it's a must be. If my silverware is clean, I'm not ecstatic. I'm not like, oh, this is the best restaurant ever. I just expected that. So when I look at the level of expectation, I don't get to the point past neutral, right? But if my silverware is not clean, I'm not going to be a happy customer, right? So if I think about other examples, aerospace, if I'm taking a flight, I expect my airline company to be adhering to safety standards. That's a must be. I'm not going to be overly excited because it's a safe airline. I just really expect it to be safe. And I don't buy an airline ticket saying, oh, and by the way, I want a window seat and I want a safe flight, right? If I'm in higher education, I expect my professors to be qualified. If I'm in healthcare, I expect whatever I'm diagnosed with to be accurate, right? And if I'm getting service, I expect my customer service to be accurate and correct as well, right? So these are things that your customer is not necessarily going to ask for, they just expect it to be there, which makes it kind of difficult when you're surveying people, because if you're asking what's important, they're not going to go back and say clean silverware. They're going to focus on other aspects typically. Okay. So the next type of attribute we'll talk about are the one-dimensional attributes. These are things, back to Hertzberg's theory, the more the better. These are requirements that are directly proportional to customer satisfaction. So if I think about fuel efficiency, the more fuel efficient my car is, the happier I am. More technology in the classroom is typically better. Better communication from my healthcare provider is good. Right? So it's important to understand what these are, because as a service provider or as any type of company providing a product or service, if I know this, then I can provide more to make my customer even happier. Now, if I compare that then back to the must be, if I don't know what has to be there and I don't provide those, my customer's not going to be happy, right? And so again, understanding these basic categories is really important. The next one is attractive attributes. These are things that customers don't necessarily expect. Oftentimes you'll hear these referred to as exciters or delighters, because the customer didn't ask for it. It's something that you'll offer that's going to set you apart from the competition. So when they're there, your customer is going to be extremely satisfied. If they're not there, so you'll see nothing in the bottom half, they're not going to be dissatisfied because they didn't expect it. So if you take an international flight, you expect in-flight entertainment, right? So that's kind of a must be. However, shorter flights, in-flight entertainment might be an exciter. Depends on who you are, right? If you're in higher education and you're a student and you get an internship that's built into your program, you may not expect that, but that could really be an exciter. In healthcare, maybe there's mental health programs that are available that you didn't expect, or eco-friendly things that are happening in manufacturing that might be exciting for you. So the first three key areas are the must be, the one-dimensional, and the attractive. So I'm going to stop and kind of focus on these first. If my basic needs are not met as a customer, my must be characteristics, it doesn't matter that you're providing anything that's an attractive attribute, because I still don't have my clean silverware, right? So you can provide, free dessert with my dinner, but my silverware wasn't clean. I'm still probably not going to be a happy customer. So as an organization, we need to know what all of these categories are, but these especially, because I have to meet the must be first. First and foremost, those needs have to be met. Then I can focus on the one dimensional and figure out, well, now that my customers are pretty neutral, they're happy, but they're not very satisfied. What can I provide more of to make them even happier? Right. And once I've hit some of those, now I can look at what's going to be a differentiator for me. What can I do that's going to be a very attractive attribute that's going to set my product or service apart from everybody else, right? So as we talk about prioritizing these, we really have to focus on understanding what those categories are. So now let's talk about the indifferent attributes. These are things that your customer doesn't really care about, right? It's often things that are going to take resources, time, money from your organization, but your customers don't really care. Now, sometimes these are things that you have to do for different regulatory requirements. So kind of setting those apart. But in general, these are things where you can save money as an organization, right? Stop spending your time, money, and effort on those. So for example, seat color in an airplane. I don't really care what, as I have a seat on an airplane and I'm going somewhere, I'm excited. I don't care if that seat color is blue or green. I'm not a huge fan of orange, but I can live with that, right? Landscaping on a college campus, that's really not where I care to spend money, right? If I'm in a hospital room, I don't really care about the decor that much, right? Or if I get a package in the mail, I don't care what color it is. So thinking about where I can spend less money on things that don't matter to the customer. And the last one are reverse attributes. This is probably the hardest one to kind of get, typically your arms around it. These are requirements or attributes that when they're absent, they actually lead to customer satisfaction. Your customers don't want these. So when they're there, it actually leads to extreme dissatisfaction. So let's talk about a few examples. If we go to the airport and there's a long check-in line, the longer the wait, the more dissatisfied I am. If I'm a student in a class, the older the material it is, the more outdated it is, the less happy I am. I want things to be current and updated. If I'm trying to schedule an appointment to see my doctor and it's really inefficient, again, the longer it takes, the less happy I am. Long customer response times. So these are things that we need to understand that are going to make our customers unhappy. So now that we've covered really the basics of the Kano model, I want to take you through a case study because we've got some great examples coming up. Banks calling you multiple times a week to sell a new credit card. That's a reverse, right? And for most of these, what we're trying to understand is from our customers' perspective, what are the majority of our customers really upset with or really happy about? So when I take you through a case study, and then we can go through the calculations and really kind of explain in a little bit more detail how we would analyze these. So with this case study, this is a Kano survey that I launched in a wound care ostomy clinic. It was in a rural hospital in the Midwest. And the problem that they were really facing was when you're dealing with rural healthcare, you have a doctor that works in wound care and they see every kind of wound. They're not necessarily specialists. So they're having to deal with everything that might possibly come through, right? So they have unclear patient expectations. And I won't get too much into the details, but when you are going to a wound care clinic, it's because you have a wound that's not healing. And so you're typically going in 2 to 3 times a week for multiple weeks until your wound does heal. But it could be, a couple of weeks, it could be months of treatment that they're doing. And what this clinic wanted to do was really focus on the patient, have patient-centered care, understand their patients' expectations based on their population so they could provide the best service to their patients possible. Okay. So I talked a little bit about wound care already, but it's essentially, again, it's non-healing wounds, things that you might have for a while. So, patients with diabetes might have a wound that takes longer to heal, or a severe car accident. But essentially what they're going through and doing is examining the wound, measuring it, checking for blood flow, determining why it's not healing, and then they'll develop an individualized treatment plan with the patient involved in that and developing that treatment plan, so they can take care of that patient. And I want to add in too, when you're talking about a rural healthcare area, you also might have patients coming from an hour or two, if not more, away to come in and get this treatment. So again, making sure that they've got personalized treatment and they have everything that they need because they're taking off work to come in a couple of times a week. So with the Kano survey, it's going to be a very different style approach to developing a survey than you've probably ever taken, right? So most of us have taken surveys where it goes from strongly disagree to strongly agree with a Likert or really technically Likert scale, where you start with some of the similarities in terms of identifying what you want to ask about. But with a Kano model, we're focusing on identifying the attributes that we want to understand more about for our customers. So in this case, we wanted to make sure that we had a comprehensive survey. So we worked with the wound care staff to make sure that we were addressing all the things that they were seeing from a patient standpoint. We also looked at the literature. There's a wound care journals out there and newsletters from the healthcare side. So we wanted to make sure that there might be some cutting edge things that we wanted to make sure we asked customers about that people may not be familiar with right yet. If we think about the attractive things, we wanted to be able to benchmark and see the best things that are happening in the field. So based on that, we developed 17 different attributes. And I won't go through each of these in detail, but these are the 17 attributes that we came up with. For example, looking at privacy for patients, written communication plans, keeping people informed of delays during the process. Okay. And we validated these with, again, the wound care staff, and then used it to develop the Kano questionnaire. So when we did this, we developed the Kano questionnaire, and this is one of the things that, again, you really have to understand your patient population or your customer population, just from a more general term. In this case, we were working with a large rural population, and we talked to several of the patients. So one of the things that you want to do with any survey, whether it's a Kano survey or a regular survey, is pilot it. From our perspective, we thought this would be great to launch it as an electronic survey, easier to collect the data. We got a lot of resistance immediately. This patient population wanted hard copy. So if you're wondering why we did hard copy, it was because patients were refusing to take the iPad and fill out the survey. But as soon as we switched to hard copy, patients were taking the survey, and it was much easier to get them to take the survey. So again, knowing the best way to really do this. We also wanted that personal approach. So this was something that when the patients came in, that we asked them to take the survey, we explained what we were doing and why we were doing it to get that. So I won't go too far into depth about that, but I wanted to kind of hit some of the highlights about what you've got to think about when you launch a Kano survey. So you'll notice that I state that we had 42 randomized questions. So we had 17 service quality attributes and 8 demographic questions. We put the demographic questions first, and then the way the Kano survey works is we're going to ask about every attribute twice. And I'll get into that in more detail, but we're going to ask about it in a functional way and a dysfunctional way. If that attribute's there, how do you feel? If the attribute's not there, how do you feel? So these are always paired questions. So that's how we got to the 42 randomized questions. So this particular wound care clinic was fairly small. At any given time, they had about 100 patients. We got 40 of them to respond over about a 3-month period. So that's a 40% response rate. I'm going to dive in just very briefly to the patient demographics because I think it's important to understand when you do this, you want to understand your your customer demographics. So while this is healthcare, your customers, and you want to make sure, right, we're all quality individuals. If we're doing analysis, we need to make sure that our sample is representative of our population. So we gathered patient demographics so that we could make sure that the information we gathered from the survey was representative of our patient population. So we got information on their gender, their age, how they felt their health status was, what their domestic situation was. Some of these questions might seem strange, but if you're caring for a wound, we wanted to know how much support you had, right? And so that was very important to understand that perspective of we're not just treating the patient, we're treating the entire patient and their support group, right? We looked at how often they visited the wound care clinic, and then how many visits they had approximately in the last 6 months, and then also how much of an impact it had on their life. Okay? So again, for us, those were the appropriate information, that we wanted to gather from a demographic perspective. You'll notice that we don't have specifics on each patient, like the location of a wound, because those are identifiers, and we wanted to make sure that this was anonymous. That way patients would be more open about giving their feedback. So let's dive in more to the Kano part of this then. So as I mentioned, for every attribute, we are going to ask the question 2 ways, in a functional form and then a dysfunctional form. So we're going to ask if something's there, how do you feel? And if something's not there, how do you feel? So the Kano model is all about the customer's perception. So we're using very precise wording and asking them how they feel. And our responses, well, they might seem a little bit strange, are very specific as well. So if we look at the functional form here, for the attribute, we wanted to focus on patients having the necessary supplies so they could take care of their wound outside of the treatment time, right? So we ask if the necessary supplies are provided for caring for the wound, how do you feel? And then we ask if they're not provided, how do you feel? And you'll notice the responses are exactly the same for each one. And we'll talk about how we analyze that in a minute. But let's think about that. I like it that way. It must be that way. So I should start saying must be there. I'm neutral. I don't really care. I'm indifferent. I can live with it that way. And I dislike it that way. So this is telling me exactly how they feel, right? Their perception of that. And since I have the same question essentially reversed, I can use those paired questions to analyze what their perception is about that specific attribute. So again, it all goes back to how we're asking if something's provided. And then based on how they respond to those, we're going to use the Kano evaluation table. So in the functional form, I have the responses to those questions. And in the dysfunctional form, I have how they responded. So I'm going to use a simple matrix to say, based on their response, it's either going to be attractive, one-dimensional, indifferent, reverse, must be, or it could be questionable. So I'm going to focus on that one real quick. So if I ask about if something's there and you like it that way, and I ask if something is not there and you like it that way, that's probably a sign that you didn't really understand what I was asking you. Same thing about I dislike it that way. There's probably some confusion. This is why you want to pilot your Kano survey, send it out to, 8, 10, maybe 15 people initially. It all depends on sample sizes, right? And the size of your overarching population. Because if you have anything that comes back questionable initially, you can fix that and look at the wording of those questions rather than the full-blown launch of the survey. So your goal is when you distribute the final survey, you really shouldn't have any questionable or very few questionable responses. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail. So back to providing those supplies. If they're provided and I like it that way, and if they're not provided, I dislike it that way, then that's a one-dimensional characteristic. So I'm going to go through everyone's survey, those pairs of questions, and compare it for each person. And then I'm going to figure out what that count is for each category. Okay. So as I do that, I'm going to go through and have a count of how many people. So for example, since Shobha's the moderator, she might have gone through and responded with the 2 pairs of questions that it was a must-be attribute for her. Doug might have said it fell on the one-dimensional based on his responses. So here, you'll notice for this one, I don't have the 40 because I had to have a response for both of those. So I had 36 people that fully answered both pairs of questions, and I've broken it down by those 36 people. So 26 people responded to the pairs of question. Sorry, did I say that right? 2 people responded to the pairs of questions must be. 2 people responded to the pairs of question that it's attractive. 28 as one-dimensional. Nobody said it was reverse. 2 were indifferent and 2 were questionable. So that gives me my total of 36 responses. Using that, I'm going to figure out what my final category is. My final category is simply which one had the highest number of responses. So 28 out of the 36 people responded that this was one-dimensional for them based on how they responded to those 2 pairs of questions. So when we went through all of this, we found out that 16 attributes were one-dimensional, 1 was attractive, and that was patients asking for after-hours care, and none of the categories or none of the attributes were listed as must be, indifferent, or reverse attributes. Okay. So that tells us where we need to start focusing our efforts on. So nothing was must be. They were good with what they expected. That's not necessarily surprising, but we can use that information. So as we start breaking down that information, we can do some other analysis to really understand it. So the first thing is the category strength. With the category strength, we want to know, because we're looking at various numbers, and in this case, it's pretty distinct that this characteristic was one-dimensional, but I would have a count like this for all 17 attributes. I'd have a table. So it just so happens that this one is very distinctly one-dimensional. However, I might end up with other ones that it's a lot closer. So calculating the category strength is telling me really how distinct that highest category is from the next highest category. So we're going to take the highest category, in this case it's 28, and we're going to subtract the second highest because we want to see the differentiation between those, and divide by the total number of responses. And again, while we had 40 people respond to start the survey, not everybody completed it. So for this attribute, we had 36 people that answered both sets of this question. And the category strength here is 72.2. What we're really looking for is that needs to be 5% or higher to tell us that that category is really distinct from the next category. And in this case, it clearly shows us that it's very distinct. So we can say with good confidence that providing supplies for wound care is a one-dimensional attribute based on the customer's responses. The next category we'll look at is the total strength. So we know now how strong that one category is, how distinct it is from the next category. The total strength is going to tell us really how much the respondents consider that feature important. So here we're going to add up the attractive, the one-dimensional, and the must-be, because these are all more of those positive characteristics. Attractive is going to be a differentiator, one-dimensional, the more the better, and the must-be, it has to be there. So I'm going to add up my responses here. We had 28 for attractive, 28 for one-dimensional, 2 for attractive, and 2 for must-be out of the 36. So this is 88.9%. So our patients felt very strongly about this characteristic. This characteristic is very important to them, right? The highest would be 100%. We're close to 90%. So that's a very strong feature that's very important to them. So as I compare this, and because of space, I didn't put everything up there, but I would look at all 17 characteristics and look at the total strength so that I can prioritize where do I need to focus my efforts on, right? So I'm going to start with the highest ones that have the highest total strength, because those are very important to the customer, right? And the ones that have lower total strength, I'm not going to focus on yet. I may not at all, depends on what it is. Okay. So ideally, I'm looking for a total strength that's 50% or higher. So that gives me a little bit of a focus in terms of where to prioritize my efforts, but then I can also look at the better aspect of it. So there's a better worse graph that can be created, but what I want to focus here more on are the better and worse values. So better is going to be a measure of the extent of satisfaction that the attribute can create for your customers. So when I look at better, I'm adding in the attractive and the one-dimensional, and I'm dividing it by the attractive, one-dimensional, must-be, and indifferent. So this is going to tell me, based off of really the attractive and one-dimensional, how much happier my customers could be, how much more satisfied they could be. So you'll notice, for example, like must-be is in the denominator, and so is indifferent, because those aren't going to create satisfaction. Must-be just has to be there. So the more I can do by adding this as an attractive or providing more of it, it's going to satisfy my customers even more. So from this perspective, for providing the wound care supplies, we get a value of 88.2%. So again, it's on a scale of 0 to 100%. I'm going to be able to look at these 17 attributes and look at which one has the potential to satisfy my customers even more and create more satisfaction, right? So again, this is more part of that puzzle of me prioritizing and working with my organization to figure out how to best focus my efforts to satisfy the customers. Now, on the opposite side of that, we can look at the worst. So we want to understand as well which characteristics could potentially cause more dissatisfaction. So worse is the extent of dissatisfaction that attribute can create for your customers. So here we're going to look at the one-dimensional and the must-be. So the must be is now in our numerator because it has to be there. So if it's not there, your customer is going to be pretty unhappy, right? Otherwise, our denominator is the same. So in this case, it just happens for this one characteristic that my better and worse values are exactly the same. That typically doesn't happen, but in this example, it happened to work out that way. So I know by not providing this, I can actually dissatisfy my customer as well, right? So I can cause dissatisfaction by not having this characteristic, right? And that's typically, if I'm looking at my must be and my one dimensional, that's telling me it really needs to be there. My customers have said it's going to lead to a lot more satisfaction if it's there and dissatisfaction if it's not there. Okay. So again, I want to look at my attributes then based off of their total strength, right? How important is it to the customer? The better aspect, which ones are based on the percentage going to lead to more satisfaction with my customers, and from the worst perspective, which ones could cause dissatisfaction with my customers. And using that, I'm going to prioritize then my efforts. Where should I focus on any of my improvements? What do I need to provide to make sure that my customers are happy? So in this case, we were able to identify 16 one-dimensional attributes, right? So these are all, the more I provide, the better. One attractive attribute, which is the after hours care. None of them were must be, indifferent, or reverse attributes. So looking at that information, where I really want to focus my time then is on my one-dimensional attributes, figure out which ones can lead to more satisfaction, focus on enhancing those to meet the customer's expectations, look at where I could potentially cause dissatisfaction, make sure I'm not causing any potential dissatisfaction with my customers. And then I'll reach some sort of balance that I'll want to then start looking at the attractive features. And in this case, it's the after hours care. But again, back to looking at the basics of those, if I had a must be characteristic, I would have to address that first. Nothing else matters if I don't have those basic needs met by my customers. Then I focus on the one dimensional, then I focus on the attractive, right? And kind of all encompassing this is understanding what your competition's doing as well too, right? Once I've met those basic needs and I've started delivering some one-dimensional attributes and I've increased what I'm delivering to my customers, then I might be at a point to figure out, is it cost effective to add in that attractive feature? Does it make sense, right? So it's really all about prioritizing your efforts. What I think is interesting about the Kano model, though, is again, it's all based on perceptions, right? My perceptions are going to be very different than somebody else's perceptions, right? And so this is why capturing that demographic information is so critical, so that you can also look at breaking things down by different groups, right? If we look at a quality perspective, customers are looking more and more for personalized care, personalized plans. And so we can then tailor things based on different customer segments and different customer needs. The other interesting thing about this is data collected over one point in time. So the data we collected for this case study, we collected over 3 months. But what's happened since we collected that data has changed, and customers' expectations have changed, and their demographics might have changed, right? So we really have to make sure that we are gathering this information and we're doing it on a regular basis. There are things that we found to be attractive features that now we just come to expect, right? So things change. just based over what's happening in industry and technological changes, right? Surprisingly, and I'll just bring up a couple of examples, but I recently bought an older car, but it was a car I was really excited about, and it doesn't have a backup camera. To me, that's kind of a must be now. I didn't really think about even looking for that because I'm so used to that being a standard item. Um, and so, looking at that lane assist with our cars is all now pretty much standard. It used to be an exciting feature. I know I was excited when my kids started driving. I was like, this is great. I want a car with this. So what we expect today and we're excited about today really becomes something that, in the future, we just kind of expect that. And those attractive features really do change and morph into must be, or sometimes they just go away because we realize we didn't really need those. Okay? So as we use the Kano model, it's something that we really want to make sure that, again, we're understanding that we're really focusing on patients' perceptions. Or customers' perceptions in general. And it's a way of really understanding those perceptions based on the uniqueness of the Kano survey and how we're asking those questions. And then we do that as providers, we can then focus our efforts more efficiently on making sure we're delivering what those expectations are. Okay. And again, we just have to make sure that we're reiterating and we're going through and gathering that survey information at a regular interval so that we're capturing those changes. So that would be more of a longitudinal study so that we can see over time what patient or customer expectations have changed and how they've changed over time. So we can get a better understanding of really our customers. Right. Well, I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. I'm happy to share the slides with anybody. I'll also share the one article from Christine Robinson that I think is just a great example of going through the Kano model and diving into what those expectations are and how the Kano survey works. Right. And I think now, Shobha, I think we'll open it up if there's any questions.
Yes, thank you so much. I will start asking the questions now.